You are listening to the Horse Radio Network, part of the Equine Network family.
Greetings, everyone. Coach Jen here, and thanks for tuning in to Horse Tip Daily, episode 1530. I'm happy to have back to the show Jessica Starcevich. She's with Spalding Fly Predators, and she's been coming on the show lately to help us work out better ways to control pest flies and biting flies at our farms. I'm sorry, we all have to deal with it. And today we're going to do a little myth busting, one of my favorite words. We're going to talk a little bit about the most common mistakes that people make when it comes to fly and pest control at their barns. And as I alluded to in an earlier tip, she's seen a few things. So what's your favorite? What's the one that makes you just want to pull your hair out?
I would say the biggest one, and this is one that honestly I did for a long time, is when we get fly traps, any of those bag traps or any other traps that have that just awful smell to them.
Oh, the stuff that has the stuff that smells like rotten eggs in it.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Everybody wants to put them right in their barn. I did it myself. Those traps are actually attractant traps. They are meant to draw flies to them. And when we put those traps too close to where we don't want flies, we actually compound our fly problem and make it 10 times worse. And I have grown up with horses. My first ride was the day after I got home from the hospital when my dad took me out. And my whole life, we put 2 or 3 traps in the barn, and they fill up quickly. So it feels good. You're
they fill up
flies
like crazy.
And I never realized that we were actually making our problem worse. It felt like those traps, we could never have enough because they just kept catching. And flies can actually detect that scent from quite a ways away. Really, you want to have those traps at least 150 feet away from where you don't want flies.
No.
Because it will bring them just in such high numbers. And I've been to barns. I went to one barn. They had one hanging in front of every stall. And the place was very, very clean, and they couldn't figure out why. And I hadn't really thought about that being an issue until I got there. And, in front of every stall was one of these bag traps. And to solve that problem, it was just taking the bags out. Within a week or 2 weeks, fly population drops because that attractant isn't there anymore. They're great traps to use, but we often use them wrong because there's not great instructions, and we want to put them right where we see the adults. And then aside from just bringing in the flies we don't like, it's also attracting in a couple of kinds of flies that wouldn't even be there otherwise. You'll tend to see a lot of blowflies, which are kind of a metallic green, copper,
I hate those
blue.
because they're slow moving and they land on you and it's I hate those.
Yep. Those really only show up when you have those traps out. They don't show up a lot else and, around horses and things like that. And the other is a fly called a flesh fly. It's going to look pretty much like all your other kind of standard black flies, but they tend to have kind of super red eyeballs. And both of those kinds of flies generally are never even going to be in or around your barn, except when those traps are there.
So it's not the trap that's the problem. It's not the trap. Put the trap in the right place. That's the solution.
It's putting them in the right place. Exactly.
So if you're curious about where they go, call the folks at Spalding Labs and they can help you out.
Absolutely. We can.
So what's the second one that makes you want to do a face plant?
The second one probably, and again, I would say this is something that I did regularly, is not thinking about my mats. If you've got mats down where you feed your horses or mats in your stalls, anytime you have mats down somewhere, it's a place that even if you're in the desert, if it's super dry, anything like that, moisture is going to stay under there. And most of the time when we're using mats, they're heavy and we don't flip them over and scrape under them every time. So you get kind of this really nice fly breeding environment underneath of those, especially if you've got, older mats that are curling up on the edges, anything like that. It's a place where I've definitely found a lot of fly larvae without expecting to. because it's just not something we tend to pick up.
I can raise my hand right now because I tend to move the mats around a lot because it smells under there, not because I'm worried about flies, but it gets moist under there and then it stinks. And that makes me crazy. No amount of stall refresher makes it go away because it's under the mat, not on top of the mat.
Exactly.
And I discovered that the hard way. I lifted that mat up because I needed to clean out underneath of it, let it dry. And
that ammonia hit you.
But there were the fly, the maggots. Oh my God, that's where they're at. They're coming from under the mat.
Yep.
There we go.
Mats and hay feeders, kind of all of the same issue. Any place where you've got hay feeders down, you're going to get stuff, at the bottom of that feeder or underneath edges, as well as the mats. And so that's a big place that we do recommend putting some fly predators in those areas because we know we're not going to clean under it very often. So that's where the fly predators are your little helpers there. You're not going to be able to flip them over every day or every 3 days. Throw some fly predators there and just take care of that problem the easy way.
Now we're going to wrap up our myth busting with my favorite.
Sure.
This is the one and this is even before fly predators were, I'm not going to say invented because they've been around, but before we knew how useful they could be for horse farms. Not all flies are created equal. Everybody thinks I'm going to buy my fly spray. I'm going to buy the most effective fly spray and it's going to fix my fly problem, because not all flies are created equal, which is why Spalding Labs has the predator control program, not just one size fits all. So
exactly.
Myth busted. How many different kinds of flies does a horse person usually have to deal with?
They're really generally only going to have the two major ones, the house flies and the biting stable flies. However, you can also, if you're near much in the way of water, you might end up with also like the big horse flies and deer flies, as well as a lot of midges, especially the biting midges that cause sweet itch and things like that. They breed in damp soil, and a lot of times repellents that work on other flies don't work on those. So any given time, the number of species of flies there probably going to be 50 to 100.
But that's terrifying. That's terrifying. Oh my gosh, I'm going to have nightmares now. Jessica.
Only a couple of them are bad though. Some of them are really good. The little flies that you see over manure, a lot of times are kind of a lesser dung fly. Their larvae actually eat other fly larvae.
Wait a minute.
So they're helpful for you.
Again, mind blown. Oh my gosh. There's so much I don't know about flies. Okay, now this is not part of myth busting. I'm sorry, but now I'm going to go down a rabbit hole.
Sure.
So if you have the lesser dung fly, who is good because he can eat other flies, and I'm guessing that the lesser dung fly doesn't bite my horse, does he?
Nope. Doesn't bother him at all.
If I'm using a generic feed through fly control, something that's supposed to keep the fly larva from growing in the manure, is that going to affect a lesser dung fly?
It can at times.
Oh man, nothing's ever black and white, is it?
It's not. Probably, and there's kind of this whole ecosystem of manure. There's, aside from the lesser dung flies, you've got the regular flies, you've got your dung beetles, you've got some rogue beetles.
I love dung beetles.
So, there's all kinds of stuff in there. And it's one of the reasons that we really encourage the integrated pest management, because with something like fly predators, we're reducing the amount of chemical you have to use for anything else, which helps, protect those other types of insects that are really helping you out as well.
Oh my gosh, this is so confusing. Again, so when somebody wants to reach out to Jessica or one of your compatriots there at Spalding, where can they go online?
SpaldingLabs.com.
SpaldingLabs.com. I encourage you to reach out and speak with one of the helpful, friendly, and oh so fascinating specialists at Spalding. As witnessed right here, everybody's met Jessica now, and she's the fly expert. Who knew? Thank you again for coming on the show and helping us out.
No problem. It was just a pleasure. Thank you.
Well, there you have it. Horse Radio Network has thousands of engaging podcasts for horse people, and you can have them sent right to your phone. Just subscribe via your favorite podcast player. This is Coach Jen, and I will be back again soon with another tip. Until then, go ride your horse. The Horse Radio Network and the Horse Radio Network hosts are not responsible for statements made by guests on the Horse Tip Daily. Please use your own judgment when listening to the tips on this show.